Oh, good morning, Debbie. Debbie Kasman from Ontario, and talking with R. Michael Fisher from Calgary. We're doing Fear Talk 7 this morning, Debbie, and really we don't need to do any real intro because I'm going to encourage people to give a link to our first Fear Talk 6. And again, the purpose of Fear Talks really is to have conversations that are out of the ordinary box when it comes to the topic of fear, fear management, fear transformation, and so on.
Good.
So this morning, do we have anything that we want to just start in on as we reflect on our last talk a little bit for sure? To what are we kind of learning is what's kind of on my mind. What did we learn from that talk? What's still stirring? What might want to be further talked about? So just jump in, Debbie, any moment. I will too. I'm just going to settle and let our readers and listeners also. If I had a phone call, I would have them phoning in. And what's your question?
Yeah. Well, for me, Michael, I'm really noticing, even more than before, the need for strategies and tools for kids and for teachers and educators to learn to teach kids in order to manage in order to better manage their fear emotions. I mean, even as adults, I'm noticing that we all need strategies and tools to manage our fear emotions. Um, it's a significant issue, and I think you mentioned in our previous talk, we don't really have these conversations. We don't talk about it. We talk around it. We talk about the fact that forest fires are increasing at an alarming rate, and hurricanes are getting worse, and those kinds of conversations increase our anxiety levels. We don't talk about um, the need for strategies and solutions and mechanisms and tools for helping us manage those emotions. And we definitely don't talk about the need for that for kids in our classrooms, for our own kids. And that's really standing out for me, particularly as I tune into the news on occasion. And I really see a lot of fear raising. I don't want to use the word fear mongering because to me that's an intentional thing. And I don't know if the media are intentionally attempting to raise fear in people, but there's certainly a lot of fear raising stories. And I don't think even the media is aware of the impact they're having on people's mental health and wellness by the choices they're making to constantly report fear raising stories.
Interesting distinction, fear raising and fear mongering. I haven't heard that before. You've thought about that a bit, or is this brand new thought?
No, I think I've thought about it a bit because I think I've always heard it as being referred to fear mongering.
Yep.
And I don't know if there is an intention behind it. It may be an unconscious, well, let me back up. It may be conscious, but it's consciously done in a way to increase viewership without thinking about the repercussions of that fear raising to increase viewership. So in a sense, I suppose it is quasi mongering, but to me, it's not totally mongering in that the media, I don't think, are deliberately trying to make people more anxious. They're trying to get more viewers. So there's a difference there.
Well, this is a pretty interesting area because it appeals to me. I use the notion of it's a fear-based newscasting.
Yep.
So if I use fear-based, that means, yeah, are you conscious that you actually yourselves, as producers of that news, and you could imagine this could be a newsroom prepping for the stories, the editors, the writers, and this could also be teachers. This could be parents. This could be psychologists. It could be leaders, political leaders, right? It's like, how conscious are you? And I think that's what this Fear Talks is for us to, even you and I, to think about and ask questions about how conscious are we aware of how fear-based processes might be going on. And we, in our last talk, even got into an interesting process kind of reflection. Oh, maybe I'm getting a little caught here, I think you said at one point, right? And my intention was not to put that as a judgment. And this is really important. It's like, it's not an ethical judgment per se on a person. I was sort of saying in that, as we talked in our last talk, was this is part of a network, a meshwork that we all can be, and literally it's almost impossible not to be somewhat tweaked by that net of influencing because of the collective fear. So even if someone has the intention, let's just say these media people, not to raise fear unnecessarily in people, they have good intention. Same with a teacher in a classroom, right? You have the good intention to do a lesson on, let's just say, the environment, and you have good intentions, and yet you cannot look just at intentions of people. I think this is maybe where we could just spend a moment, Debbie, is we have to also think of context of what is already flowing, what are dominant, to use a more technical term, what are dominant discourses that are already flowing and moving in a society that create power, attention, attraction, and get the goods. They produce money, they produce people, viewers. That's money because those are the advertisers now. Oh, God, more hits on that show. Let's do our advertising there.
And we've
So,
progressed, if I may jump in, Michael, we've progressed to a point now where it gets votes. And that's kind of a new level that we're beginning to see.
yeah, votes for the good or the bad or the ugly, etc.
Yeah.
I just watched the CBC. They did an interview, and pretty much most stations do this when you watch for years. Let's do a story on anxiety and going back to school.
Yes. I've seen them for years.
Me too. I mean, they're literally just it's sort of, let's pull that one out of the box because
Yes.
it's the same old in a way. Everybody, a lot of people are going through this because they're going through this. So how can we bring in the psychologist to advise?
Yeah.
Well, without getting into fine details, that interview at one point, it was interesting to watch. I found a very sort of difficult conversation at some points between the hosts of CBC doing that program and their host that they had, the visitors. And it was interesting to watch the discomfort actually at times of uh, and also just the repetition of them all sort of saying the same thing and then all nodding with each other.
Yes.
And yet there was one piece of the discourse that stood out, and I think it's relevant to when I talk about context and you're talking about, we have to look at context, not just intention or, good strategies and tools, as you just said earlier. Yeah, you can have good strategies and tools, but in what context? What is the context of design for applying tools and strategies? And the context sort of popped out of the director of medicine at the Children's Sick Hospital, who was one of the visitors. And he said, I'm pretty much quoting here, paraphrasing, he said, we have an epidemic of anxiety disorder in our society, never mind our children.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
But people really, that kind of just came out when he was talking, and then everything sort of went back to the level playing field. Well, we can do this for our kids, we can do this for our anxiety. And I went, no, he just said epidemic of anxiety disorder in our society.
Yeah. And that comes back to a point I made last time, and I felt badly making it because I felt like it may be interpreted as a gender-based comment, and it wasn't. But I had made the point in Fear Talk 6 that typically, if as a teacher or a principal, if a mom was anxious, then a child was anxious. But I believe it's not just moms. It's just that moms tend to in our society tend to spend more time with children than the dads, although that's changing. So you know, I'm sure if there are anxious dads out there, then there are anxious children connected with that too, which comes back to the point you just made about the epidemic in our society. And I believe that's true. And I guess the first thing we need to do, number one, is recognize there's an epidemic in our society. This isn't just about kids going back to school. And then start talking about all the elements that contribute to that. And of course, also talk about strategies and tools to manage within that context.
So if we, if we were talking to a group of teachers at the beginning of the year that, we're trying to have what some people say is that we need a fear-free zone. We need our school to be fear-free even. And I was just collecting a few quotes I've seen in the media.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but I don't like that approach. Creating a fear zone says to me,
Fear-free.
fear-free zone says to me, you can be anxious out here. Come on in where nobody will make you feel afraid, and then go ahead and leave. Well, that's all well and good, but what happens when you're out here 99.9% of the time without any strategies? Creating a fear-free zone is not the answer. Developing fear coping strategies is the answer. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so it is a controversy, and that's why I raised it. And thanks for jumping in there on it. I've been critical of it for probably 30 years. What I saw was the overemphasis. So not that safety is not important in schools and education, protection, right? These are the basic, sensible things that we don't want our children to feel that. And yet, the attempt to sort of cleanse it, to cleanse the educational environment, the learning environment. And this is where teachers, right? You can just think, brand new teachers coming in, oh, I'm going to make my room so safe, and I'm going to, and I'm going, but, we also have to prepare our kids not for some kind of, we can't create a bubble here. We can't create an echo chamber of aren't we all wonderful and loving and kind and this is so safe. And because as you say, those kids, every one of them is still connected in the moment that they may feel, quote, safe in your environment. They're still connected to a thread of maybe very not safe, in fact, threatened on an ongoing basis, never mind what they hear in the media from their peers, from the, as you say, when they walk out of the school ground. So there's something just about, I am not somebody, zero tolerance, totally cleanse the system, and then we're all doing a great job. And I sort of think a little bit of the analogy, and this is controversial, of, if, and some critics of this trying to be fearless or fearlessness and all this stuff, the critics say, kids have to actually learn how to deal with fear, not be cleansed of it and not have no risk environments. In fact, that's actually quite unhealthy for developmental processes.
I think so too. It reminds me of helicopter parenting, attempting to bubble wrap kids, however you want to label it. It's that whole swoop in and keep kids from ever having to deal with anything challenging or difficult mentality, which is well and good in that moment, but it's not well and good, agreed, for their development long term and for their ability to learn how to do those things for themselves. So it is worrisome.
So we're trying to find some kind of, quote, balance between too much risk, too much fear, and this is the classical way of talking about fear in education and learning, and then not enough.
Yeah.
Now we have also this political discourse I want to bring up that is historical in my research, that I'm going to call the more conservative side of thinking. And I think there's a really healthy side to conservative. I think there's a really healthy side to liberal, and then I think there's even a healthy side to radical outside of that box. So I'm not being political in terms of parties here, but people with more conservative values, when they're added up, they have a general tendency to believe kids need to experience fear actually to be able to get control of them. Number one,
Yeah.
use fear as a
Mhm.
form of potential threat to them to get control, and even then to punish and reinforce that if you don't, you will get. And so this is a whole conservative view, challenged by certain liberals for sure, and even some radicals that think that just is entirely the wrong paradigm in the whole first place. Well, you got new teachers, and even as a parent myself, I know I times I would want my children to be a bit afraid of not of disobeying me in some way, because when I said something and meant it, I wanted them to adhere to it for various reasons, right? You have all the rationales. So how about you? I mean, this is a tricky territory.
I always tried to put it on not fear of me, but and fear of the consequences, but I don't even like to use the word fear of the
Yeah,
consequences.
yeah.
Just not wanting to have to, just not wanting to have to deal with the consequences. So, and I'm thinking in terms of parenting my own son, particularly when he was little. I was a big fan of the 1, 2, 3 magic approach. Like you say something that you want your child to do once, you only say it once. And if they're not cooperating, then you start counting, and they learn very quickly that by the time you get to 3, if they haven't brushed their teeth, that's what you've asked them to do, then there's a timeout or something associated. And if they're 3 years old, then it's a 3-minute timeout or whatever. And so for me, it would be not wanting to experience those consequences rather than being afraid of me. That's how I always tried to approach it as a mom. As a teacher, it was a little more challenging because you're dealing with 28, 30, 32 kids at a time. And so it became more of, um, do I have to call your parents, or do I need to have a chat with the principal, or do you and I need to step out into the hall and have a chat? It became more of a sort of a fear of that, and the fear probably does come into play at that level as a teacher, but I intentionally did not want to do that to my sons. So I took a softer approach, but it was very much a very firm and consistent approach, which I think accomplishes the very same thing in the end. It's just a different approach.
Hmm. So we are now, if we had teachers listening to this, which I think we're both interested in, like even pre-service or service teachers, um, how could we say something different and invite them into something different than they're likely to hear as sort of typical fear management, classroom management strategies, that they're going to get in textbooks. They're going to hear different opinions from all the different teachers informing them in their learning to become teachers, etc. What would we sort of say different? And like, what do you think is different in what we are trying to do?
I always, with kids, and even as a principal, tried to frame it around you've got 2 choices. So it wasn't that the child was afraid of me, it's that they had two different choices to choose from. They could continue down this road, and this is what will happen, or you can do this instead, and this is what will happen. And the two this is what will happens are quite opposed. This is a happy a happy ending, this is a not very happy ending. You get to decide. So to me, that takes the fear of authority away, and it puts it more on the child making a decision and choosing whether or not they're going to make the right choice, or the choice that leads to a happier outcome, or an outcome with consequences. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the advice I would give to new teachers starting out.
So I hear that as behavior and choice.
Yeah,
That's where the focus is, right? On that type of management
yeah,
of, you know, difficult behaviors, call it whatever, challenging behaviors.
yeah.
So choice and behaviors. Well, that's exactly what I learned too when I was working with youth. It's the same process. Try to give choices. What I'm sort of saying and suggesting here is that is already out there. I mean, you'll find that advice if you're a teacher or a parent pretty much in a lot of locations. Now, some people don't bring in it maybe as clear or say it the way we're saying it. But there, for me, I'm still searching, right? This is the co-inquiry. I'm just searching with you for what would be different. What would really be different, maybe that is not still in the discourses of that kind of choice behavioral management. And I kind of go to the notion of, okay, you need to understand that, but what would make it transformative? Oh, what's that word? What would make the exchange that is in regard to our consciousness of we don't want to be increasing fear in the world. And if we put that up on the classroom right wall with the diagram, and that there was a path of fearlessness is what we talked about in the last program, and you were very excited about that as an image, as a mapping, as a sense of journey, as a sense of where we're going in this classroom. That's what we're trying to do. It's not about no fear, it's about a path of fearlessness.
Yeah.
How are we moving along the path? So if the students, knew that that was the setting and the context and the messaging for your classroom, it still raises the question of what could we actually bring to that conversation on choice and behaviors at any moment, which are really the pragmatics of. But can that fearlessness frame do something different? So I'll let you just play with that.
Yeah, I don't know. I would have to give that some thought, because I see what you're saying. We're attempting to connect the behavior with the path of fearlessness. And the path of fearlessness is a lot easier to connect to if the child is afraid of something that you aren't causing. So they're afraid of monsters under the bed, or they're afraid of the dark, or whatever. It's a lot easier to take that and connect it to a transformative path of, well, this is an opportunity to practice courage. That's super easy. Switching a specific behavior where you're involved with a child one-on-one and you are the authority into that path is harder. And I actually don't have the answer at the moment. I need to think about that one, because I'm sure there is a connection there somewhere. And I think it would be phenomenal to use that connection once we've figured out what it is. I don't know what that connection is. Do you have any thoughts around that? I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, so one of the things we're doing right now is, just before I jump into that, is you and I are starting to have a conversation. How could we create a kind of a small book, a guidebook? And you're working on that right now. And I think this is exactly one of the questions. I don't want just a regular fear management classroom handbook out there if we're going to apply it to some of my research and work. I think there's a lot of things we could do, but let me just start with one that comes quickly to mind is, if I have to do in a classroom those kinds of choice behavioral management things, which I'm going to have to do, even if I have that framework, that the class, and I keep repeating to the class, we have these possibilities, when fear arises, to actually practice a virtue. So that actually becomes another choice. It's not a choice for the child only to take the two behavioral, option A, option B, which is the pragmatic choice, right? It's we also say to the child, however we convey this, and that is the trick, and that is the art of getting that communication. We also say, well, even beyond those behavioral choices, even if that didn't work out so well and we still ended up in a conflict, right? And we're still in a struggle, and that's obviously because there's some kids you can even give that choice in behavior and you'll still have
For
that.
sure. Oh yeah, for sure.
So and then I sort of say, get out of the pragmatic mode for a minute, right? And this is hard for teachers. Yeah, but I have to, and what do I do on Monday? And and then you can just watch all the anxiety. So I would always try to get the teacher to reflect on their anxiety in the moments as well, of how they're handling it. And they can reflect and journal after that incident. Every one of those, what looks like just a behavior choice, right, and just a management, is actually much more interior. So the interior, or the unpragmatic part, is what kind of relationship of energy, really, or what kind of dynamic is going on that I can help that child and myself to move to a higher virtue when there is this. And even not to just do behavior and choices, because behavior and choices, why it's problematic is because it's all based on rational theory.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the idea that so-called humans operate on a rational basis, that we have that capacity. Our whole law system, legal system works on that. We assume in modern humans that we have rational capability, and therefore we should make rational choices. Well, it just seems society has some of that. And my view is, how do we, and I still, don't have a quick, because I haven't thought about enough either, but I want to be able to go into the irrational spaces with myself and my relationship with children, with anybody else. What does irrational mean? Well, it means not relying on that child to always be rational.
Okay, so here's a question. As you're talking, I'm visualizing in my head what this might look like with let's say a kindergarten child, or a child of grade 2 or whatever. So let's say we have a child who is getting ready for recess and doesn't want to put his or her snow pants on. And it's super cold. There's lots of wet snow outside. They have to wear their snow pants, or there's a danger of frostbite or whatever. And let's say they're refusing. So, the traditional path would be give the child a choice. You either put your snow pants on and go out for recess, or you can't go out for recess and you'll have to do this instead, which actually may be a much happier choice for the child. So that could end up backfiring. But I'm just thinking off the top of my head, how would you get that? How would you shift that conversation into an irrational space? How would you shift that conversation into this is an opportunity to practice? What virtue would we be practicing, and how would you shift that? That's what I'm trying to figure out as we're having this conversation.
I think part of it you have to begin to realize is that we're not just in a rational argument, especially if the conflict continues and, quote, seems irrational, right? And we know we are all capable of even being irrational. In other words, we say stuff that doesn't make sense. It's not logical. And of course, especially with children, we ought not expect that as their modus operandi. But even with adults, as my experience, we ought not expect that either. In other words, it's easing the tension that I have to try to find a rational, logical answer and solution to what's going on.
Right.
And so whatever we can do, and so with children, where I'd start if I was a curriculum designer, I'd say, okay, well, let's enter the magical realm.
Oh, I like that. Okay, I'm in.
Right?
Let's go. And what are we going to do in there? That's great.
So we have this layer, what I call pragmatic. We have to function in the world. This is what the other kids are doing, the conformity of rationality. And then if there is a rationality, which I would argue has probably got to do with power issues, being hurt, can't stand authority because that hurts me and I feel you're being authority, you're forcing me. And to conform to a classroom, there's an amount of forcing that is inevitable.
Yeah.
So I think it's for us rational adults, so-called, to just, okay, well, then let's go into the magical realm.
You do with that child in the magical realm. Let's go in that magical realm together.
Yeah, and so I'm going to actually go with you. I may not right now because I got to look after those other kids, but you go hang out here. You got that play space or whatever, or some kind of alternative, and it could even be a symbolic alternative. And let's get the wands.
Yes. Or whatever. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
And it also can be, let's, why don't you get your teddy bear or
the magic hat or what?
Pillow, and etc. And I'm going to let us then start in a conversation in the magical world, or, whenever I get the space to do that with you. And or if you do this now, let's make sure that we do magical time afterward. Well, what magical time I would look at is, it's got to do with their emotional affective self.
Yeah.
See, not the rational, not the choice making and the behavioral.
Yeah.
It's that interiority of the emotional affective self. And in a spiritual perspective, you could even say, I want to attend to the spirit of that child, not just the child's behaviors or
That's so
personality.
beautiful. And I could see, if I were that child in that situation, I would just melt. I mean,
I think.
as an adult, the minute you said it, I said, okay, let's go. Like, whoa. And the issue is gone. It's completely gone. The heaviness of, I don't want to go outside, you're bothering me, don't make me do this, vanished. And it was replaced with a lightness and an excitement and a yes, which completely turned off the entire situation. That's how I felt. I mean, I felt that. I felt it right in my heart as an adult. It was like an arrow right into my heart. And it shot this lightness in. And if I were a little kid, I'd be, yes, let's go now. Problem solved. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I think problem dissolved. The problem
Yeah.
dissolved. We're trying to dissolve the problem rather than always solve the problem.
Yeah.
And good therapist knows how to do that too, because you're often dealing with clients in a therapy room, which I have done, and they are resisting all kinds of things that they don't want to talk about. They're denying. They may be challenging your authority to go there, and mistrust and so on. And so the skill and the art of communication at this level is to take it out of that fear-based structure, right, of an authority and a client, a teacher and a student, a parent and an adult. It's not giving up authority.
Yeah.
It's letting go of it strategically.
Or it's even sharing authority. That's how I see it.
I
Sharing
think,
child. Because if you're entering that place together, you're sharing your authority. You're extending an invitation the child is probably going to accept, and you're sharing authority in that space, which is different than relinquishing authority. You still have it, you're just sharing it.
Okay, so we're getting some pieces. So we want to get to the sharing authority, and obviously, because we've looked after enough safety and risk issues, that this isn't of that kind of caliber where we just have to take control now. Sorry, you have to come now. and sometimes you have to pull them. But the idea of sharing the authority is, yes, with me, but it's with me in a different context, right? In the magical realm. And then we actually are both going to access other authorities that are not me and not you.
Yeah, that's so cool.
So we have, for example, different archetypes, or we could have Merlin in the classroom. Yeah. We could have some other figure in the classroom. And in a Christian world, in a Christian school, they would have, oh, well, let's go to Jesus. Let's go to Mary. Let's go to God.
I love that. I mean, I instantly thought of the Care Bears, because when my son was young, Care Bears were a lovely moral authority for that preschool age. So let's go.
Were they? Okay.
Let's go into the clouds with the Care Bears,
Okay.
as an example. What invitation would you extend to a teenager? Would it be the same, or would it be different?
Again, they're very attracted, in my experience, they're very attracted to these archetypal powers. So heroes, superheroes, the heroic figures from all their media, popular culture, comic book magazines. So as a teacher, you want to be in tune with what's in the culture, what are kids paying attention to that is really cool to them.
So what's the invitation? It wouldn't be the magical realm. It would be the superhero realm. Let's go. That makes.
So the simple word is that they'll understand, and you can actually, again, you can preset this from day one in the classroom. Oh, well, we also have the fiction realm. Because fiction is really important, and that includes story, that includes literature, that includes poetry and art, and those adolescents love to express, whether it's creating a song, a rap tune, a dance. That's irrational stuff. That's the aesthetic realm.
You know what I would do early on as a teacher if I were back in the classroom?
Yeah.
I did something similar with kids. I didn't do it at the beginning of the year, but as we talk this through, I would do it early on. For say junior intermediate, so grades 4 to 8, I would say, or very early on, we would do an assignment. Who's your favorite superhero? Now, create yourself as a superhero, and what's your superpower going to be? So that's the initial assignment, and then they can study different superheroes. They can pick one to model themselves after.
Yeah.
Draw themselves. They can create their superpower. This and then present. This is me. This is my superpower. That then allows you, as your next level, to then enter into that superhero space. What would your superhero say, or what would you as a superhero
Yeah.
circumstance, right?
Yeah.
And to me, that's just the entry level. You could set that up the first week of school,
Yeah.
and set yourself up second week of school for
Yeah.
your discipline within that realm.
Yeah. It's great. You can just see we're now tapping into other spheres
Yeah.
that are more interior, and they're also exterior in that sense of that archetypal heroic part of us. And why was because I want to see each child, no matter who, what age, I want to see each adult as having that better nature, that higher nature of self, right? And we talked, that quote that you gave the other day on FearTalk 6 was that, there is a higher level that even the youngest child is tapping into and is capable of making this higher virtues choicing and awareness, right? So this is an education, what I call, of transforming constantly to higher levels of being.
Just thought of something soon as you said virtues. So as kids are creating their superpower, they also can choose their super virtue. And that pulls in the 4 arrows, the opportunity to embrace a virtue that we were talking about last week. So not only do you have a superpower, but you have a super virtue. And the power is more physical, the virtue is more
Yeah,
character, right?
it's more communal. It's virtue is always about a we concept, right? It's like all practice is virtue for the betterment of we. So you move them into that we perspective, not just their I perspective.
Yeah.
And then to add the it perspective, the third integral aspect to that, the I, the we, to the it perspective, is you just, when you create your superheroes, right, and they create an image or a painting or cut out from a magazine, up on the wall, you put the path of fear to the path of fearlessness in some kind of diagram, which takes us along that path to love. And then they can put their superhero right on the path of fearlessness.
Yeah.
So that the superhero is located. You see, and this is what I think as a teacher I want to do that's probably different than most people would do in curriculum. I want to continually remind us of the path, moving from fear to fearlessness to love. And that is the arc. That's the ethical arc. That is the evolutionary arc, if you want to use those languages. But it's the transformative arc. And there will be a place along that path you can even show, there's a sort of a bridge. And when we mature and we make enough decisions on certain ways we can behave, we'll actually cross that bridge, and no longer will, more than 50% of our choice making be fear-based in general. Because we actually are maturing to some kind of, you can use whatever word. If it isn't maturing, it's just you're working closer to be that ideal hero. So we can actually locate those on a path of fearlessness, those icons, those images for them as well. And I would even go right to in the kindergarten magical level and create those. So it's kind of like different lands, right? We have Wonderland, we have this kind of land, we have a fear land, we have a fearlessness land, we have a love land.
Yeah.
And love land is really hard to get to, but we all have it in us, right? But we have to find it.
As you were talking, I had this really beautiful image of a school-wide focus. Age appropriate, as you just mentioned, depending upon which land you're using or which realm you're accessing, depending upon your grade and your age. But school-wide, in that the hallways are just filled with the same kinds of pathways. And so it's not just one classroom, but it's a whole school-wide focus established at the very beginning of the year.
Yeah.
So that would be incredible. Would be incredible to see that in
You
action.
can just sort of see it's got a little different feel than we're going to build a school of culture of trust.
Mm-hmm.
Or we're going to feel we're going to build a school that's a safe zone, a fear-free zone.
That's for adults. That makes adults feel happy. It does nothing for the kids. Whereas you take it to the kids' level, it's all for and about the kids, and that makes so much more sense.
Yeah, and that's where the adults and the teachers, we have to keep redesigning ourselves, to get out of that rational, logical paradigm of how we were, usually typically educated and so on. And that's right. And you said that in the last talk. Schooling is all for the kids. If we design it so that they reach their highest potential, then society will benefit from that higher potential.
Yeah.
And that's a hard lesson for us to get because we have such a fear of losing control.
Yeah. That's a big one for teachers, no question, and parents. That's a big one. A big. When you're standing in front of 30 kids and you're a new teacher and it's the first week or day of school, or it's your first really challenging encounter with a student while the whole class is watching.
Yeah.
It's all about fear of losing control and fear of losing to the kid.
Yeah, I've been there, you've been there.
Yeah.
So we need a lot of prep, and teachers need a lot of prep and a lot more work on this. I was just want to shift a little bit. I was listening to a talk by Jeff Snipes, who's a leader, futures. He was a CEO, really successful, and now he's talking about fear and future and leadership in organizations. And at one point he was in the lecture, it's like a TED Talk recently, and he's listing all the various things that cause anxiety in living today. And then at one point he said, he sort of stopped, and because he was listing, climate change and, all kinds of horrible things going on. And then he said, maybe, I'm quoting him, and maybe as I'm running through this list, anxiety-provoking things.
Yes.
He said, you're finding your own level of anxiety increase a little bit.
Absolutely.
I apologize for that.
Oh.
End of quote.
That's a nice layer to add on. Now, we can't all go around doing that all the time because we would become immune to that comment. But as somebody who's starting to carve a new path, as a leader, maybe potentially trying to carve a new direction, a new path, that's a beautiful thing to say.
I must admit, I've never heard it before.
Beautiful.
I've never heard a speaker do it before. And so I wrote it down. And then it related to the Robert Sardello quote in FearTalk 6 when I said, there's this ethic from Robert Sardello's book is the tough part in talking about fear is not to not raise more fear in talking about fear.
Right. That's right.
And I said, this guy just practiced that without knowing. And then I thought, but it's not quite finished. Because then he went on and continued his talk.
Yeah.
So it's like apologizing for raising people's anxiety. Okay, it's a point of recognition, which you just talked about. We have to recognize first. But then it was just like there was some sort of incomplete. He didn't quite know where to go with it. I was going, what a perfect teaching moment right now.
Yeah. Let's all take a few deep breaths or something.
Exactly.
Yes. Let's all send love out into the universe or whatever you want to say.
Or you know what? We're all together on this.
Yeah. We're all, I got your back. We're together on this. Yeah.
Because it raises my anxiety too.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of nuances he could have gone. Well, Debbie, thanks for this talk this morning. This has been excellent. Again, I'm not sure if there's anything you want to, we've brought up a lot, but if there's anything you want to add to, I would just invite anybody who watches our videos to definitely email me, and I will make sure that Debbie gets the email. I've also given links to Debbie's work, and you could also email her directly, I take it as well. So Is there anything you'd like to add as we close this today?
No, just thank you very much again, Michael. It was a lovely chat, and I'm taking away two really big ideas with me, which will be super helpful as we tackle the book together that you were speaking about earlier. And I love the whole magical realm, superhero realm idea. I just think that's phenomenal. So I'm going to give some more thought to that, and definitely we'll address that in the upcoming book.
Okay, now so end with the Matt Groen cartoon. 2001, Life in Hell. Two characters that are talking to each other all the way through. Character one, I'm afraid. Character one, I'm afraid of getting old. Character one, I'm afraid of dying. Character one, I'm afraid of ghosts. On and on, box, there's 12, 14 boxes. And then at the end he says, I'm afraid of rejection. Character one, I'm afraid of being unloved. Character one, please hold me. Character one. Character two, I was afraid you'd say that.
Very good. I thought character two would have left the room. Very
Tend
good.
and befriend when someone's in fear.
Very nice. It's a lovely ending.
We all need a hug.
Absolutely.
Bye, Debbie.
Bye, Michael.